All right, let's get this show on the road. Kriega Bundalo. Welcome back to the channel, everybody. I am Tennessee Fats, and I'm coming to you today from the library because today we're going to be doing a Marvel Omnibus review. Now, we've done a few of these Marvel Omnibus reviews on the channel, but most of the ones we've done so far have all been Robert E. Howard related, because that's really what we talk about here on the channel. We've even done some Valiant ones because, well, I like Valiant comics. And we've even done one Dynamite one that was sort of kind of related to Robert E. Howard, but listen, you want to check that out, go check out the channel and you can actually watch that one and what we thought of that. Today we're doing something that's completely un-Robert E. Howard related. Well, actually, you could kind of make an argument that there is one tiny connection here that could be made. Yeah, but I'm not gonna. Listen, today we're walking through this. Let's pick it up. Get the board up. This is what we're going to be talking about today. This is the Marvel Omnibus for the Invaders. Now, this is completely not the sort of thing that we talk about here on the channel normally. So we're going to shoot this video in 4 parts, okay? The first part we're going to walk through is we're going to walk through why I ended up with this. And I'm shooting this particular chapter because, well, we need to explain this to our regular viewers here as to how we ended up with this, okay? That's that one. For those of you who just want to find out about the book, you can skip that chapter completely, go on to the next one. Second part we're going to get into is actually looking at the physical aspects of this book. What's the book look like? What's it physically made up of? And how does it actually feel? How is it manageable? Third part's going to be where we get into, well, what's the story? And this is going to be the part where we're going to really be tap dancing around the minefield, because I got to tell you, there are landmines all over this book. We're touching none of them. We're going to talk about some of the main themes that come out of the book, some of the arcs that are within there that are kind of interesting without doing any spoilers, and then we're just going to wrap that up at that point in time. The fourth part of this one, and this is where we do the one where it's ad hoc and I shoot it in one take, which is Tennessee Fats, should I buy this or shouldn't I? Well, I don't know. We'll find out when we get there. Let's get into the book. Okay, let's talk about the why. This is the part where it's really geared towards you, the guys who are normally watching my channel. Because, as you guys know, we talk about Robert E. Howard here. There's a whole shelf of it over here. I read this stuff all the time. But I'm also a comic collector, which is evidenced by all the other stuff we talk about on the channel, which is on this side. But there's a lot of things that I've read historically that have always had me sort of scratching my head. And I'll tell you, it's because I read Marvel comics, or I historically have read a lot of Marvel comics. I'm actually reading very little by way of Marvel comics right now. Reading Doctor Strange, that's coming out pretty cool. Enjoying that series. I just started into the whole Gods series, which is, I don't know yet. Still kind of on the fence on that one, but either way, historically I've read a lot of Marvel. Let's just leave her at that, okay? The problem is when you're reading old Marvel, and when you're reading part of the Marvel Big Three, you invariably run into some issues with editorial asterisks. Now, for those of you who have read those 1980s books and early 1990s books, and this is, by the way, pre-interwebs, which is why I'm referencing this, that editorial asterisk was the asterisk of death. We all hated this. So listen, if you were reading anything Captain America back then, Fantastic Four back then, Avengers back then, you would invariably be reading something and you would say, no, reading along, happily can be, suddenly asterisks of death. And you go, oh, now what? Asterisks of death. See Invaders number 8. Are you kidding me? Reading along in your Fantastic Four. Double asterisks. See Giant Size Invaders number 1. Are you kidding me? Here's a classic. Reading your Avengers. Triple asterisks. See Avengers number 56. Are you kidding me? Like, these things were just death knells, because if you're a comic collector and you're a little OCD, I'll say little here, even though I know that little isn't the right word. If you're like that, like me, and I'm leaving myself here, you read that and you get to the point where you're like, oh, I gotta go to the comic shop and try to find this stupid thing. Because you want to read the story, you want to find out what it is. So after reading all of those back then, a couple of years back when we had some free time on our hands, I said to myself, maybe you should go and actually pick up this Invaders series. Remembering that back when I was looking in the shops back in the day, I would be going through the 50-cent bin to find these. That's right, I'm that old. The 50-cent bin. Ticket. Oh, Invaders number 13, toss it a stack. Invaders number 15, toss it a stack. And you would read them and you would just throw them away. Because really, the Invaders in my mind back then was quite frankly put a throwaway, inconsequential, mean-nothing series. I mean, how much could it possibly mean? It was retroactively written about World War II 30 years after the fact. So it's like, Really? Like, what? Revisionist history, what? I don't know. So you just sort of set it aside. Well, I decided I'd go back and find it. And I did. I found a stack and it looks a little bit like this. Well, I can tell you, finding this stack, which by the way does include Invaders number 1, and it does include Invaders number 8, that one I referenced, number 8. It's in there. Finding this was a pain in the ass. It was a right royal bloody pita. And I'm not going to lie about this thing, and I'm going to call it as it is. For some stupid reason, and don't ask me why, I don't know why, the comic market has decided that even though these are 5, 10, 15, 20, and in some cases up to more money than that, even though they're that much, if you want to buy these in a local comic shop, they're trying to charge you anywhere between 20, 50, 80 bucks per issue. This is the Invaders, okay? This was a non-consequential series. It came out in 1975. I think it had, what, 40 some odd issues. It had a couple little crossovers, but it was written outside of the contemporaneous timeline. It was something written after the fact. So how could you possibly justify that I'm going to spend $50 to read a single book of the Invaders when all I'm trying to do is fill in that stupid little OCD checkbox in the back of my head that's been there for almost 30 years now that says, oh, asterisk, see Invaders number 8. Yeah, that was a little bit of a frustration for me. A little bit of a lot of a frustration for me, actually. So I guess I vented this at some point in time to my family. And my loving family went out and bought that giant omnibus that I showed you in the intro. That was their solution. And that's how I ended up here with this. And well, when you own something that big, and really, you invest the time and you read it. I've always wanted to read these things, so I did. Ergo, why we're here. Now, what's the really weak, and I mean really weak correlation to Robert E. Howard here? Roy Thomas. Yeah, and this is why I'm actually giving this thing more of the time of the day that I would normally put into a normal Marvel series. That's actually what drove me a little bit into actually considering taking this plunge years ago, which turned out to be a phenomenal foible and a schlemazel, and we've now ignored it and moved on. Roy Thomas is the man that literally brought Conan to Marvel. This is the man that took Conan from being really an underground Spanish comic only production at that point in time to really the pantheon of written material that it is today. All of that iceberg where you see the tip of it up here, but the minute you start digging in, you end up with boxes and boxes and boxes of comics in your basement. That's all because of Roy Thomas. He's the guy that did it. He's the guy that wrote this. He sat down and said, I want to make a 1940s war comic. Stan bought in, and that's how this whole thing happened. So, I'll give it the time of day. Now let's start getting to the actual review of the book, what the stories are within it, and then we'll get to that touchy question. Should you buy this? Okay, let's get into the book itself. Now, I gotta tell you, I gotta put this thing down really gently here because the camera's sitting on the table, and I'm sure if I bump this, it's gonna make one heck of a shake. This is the book, okay? So, interesting, and this really shouldn't surprise us when we're looking at these Marvel ones, that what we see here is really the majority of the graphics are all wasted on the dust jacket. Now, the dust jacket for me, I know this is a me thing, and I'm sure it's probably not a you thing, but I gotta tell you, I can't stand these things. I don't understand them at all. Now, I'm not a professional bookbinder. I am sure there is some physical protective ability that they give the book when it's on the shelf. I have no idea what it is. It makes no sense to me. Really, it's something that it's more of a nuisance for me than anything else, because every time I go to pick up one of these books, I have to take the dust jacket off, throw it to the side, and then put the book wherever I'm going to read it, because it's just going to get destroyed otherwise. Anyway, but what a dust jacket is, it's a very cheap and nice way to put all sorts of graphics on this. So the front of this one is actually beautifully done. You've got the Invaders here, and this is the cover from Giant Size Invaders #1. It's been reproduced. They've changed the trade dress on it to make it so it's the modern Invaders logo, which I think was reused when they made the Volume 2 series. Yeah. Interesting one that they put this on here. Obviously this is the best depiction of the team you could do, well, before the other members joined. Same as every other Marvel Omnibus, it's got this on the side where you've got a black background. They're doing this obviously for a theme. You've got the Marvel Omnibus at the top. Nice little picture of Captain America down there because, well, I guess of the big three, he's the guy that wants to stand out the most. And then on the back, you get this. A beautiful picture of every issue that's involved in this, and as well as a description down at the bottom. And of course, there's the other two of the big three that are in here. There's the original Human Torch and Submariner. Obviously, a little blurb up at the top. Hey, let's go back to World War II, and here's every single issue that's included in here. So what does this actually include? Well, it includes all 40 some odd issues of the original run. It's got the New Invaders miniseries. It's got the Marvel 2-in-1 crossovers. It's got a What If thrown in there. It's got a Fantastic Four thrown in there. Like, it's got a lot in here. Even some Marvel Premiere, I think, which had that Liberty Legion tie-in that was in here. Quite a lot in here, and that's why you end up with a book which, and you see me handling this somewhat gingerly, that's this thick, right? Okay, this is literally like 2 inches thick of just solid reading material. This would not have been easy to put together. And if you look at the way it's bound, and I was wondering about this, I was thinking about this just the other day. I was thinking, you know, I'm pretty sure 2 inches is probably the largest bind that you can do with this type of binding, if I remember correctly from the forms I sent down when I did my custom binding. But then I went and I compared it to my giant size Man-Thing omnibuses over there, which is about 3 inches thick. It's got the same type of binding, so clearly I was wrong. Anyway, kind of neat. Anyway, let's get the dust jacket off here and let's get into the actual book itself, okay? Dust jacket, as I say, beautifully put together, very nicely done. Now, what Marvel does, and I do like this, when they get the dust jacket gone and out of there, they've actually taken the time to put a nice cover on these things. Typically, it's either something very understated or it's something like this, where you see this beautifully matte finished image, which is a collage of what's inside. Now, I know when we looked at the Cull ones, I'm pointing over there in the library because that's where my Cull and Conan ones are. When you take the dust jacket off of those, they're a little more understated, but they still give you something graphic. My only issue with this is there's nothing on the front saying this is the Invaders. The pictures clearly say it's the Invaders, but nothing on the, well, that could actually infer it's the Liberty Legion, but anyways, there's nothing on the side of this. If I lost that dust jacket, or if I took that thing off and threw it out because I hate them, and I put this on my shelf, I would have no idea what this book is. And that, to me, that's a bit of a foible. That's a bit of a foible. The back also has nothing on it. But, I don't know, something identifying on here I think should have been the way they go. Beautiful imagery though, and I like the nice matte finish. It does literally feel good. It feels good on the touch. When I was reading this, because it is so heavy, I actually had to take the dust jacket off. Yeah, I've tossed it over there right now. And put this on a book stand on my desk. And that's where I want to get to the next point. This weight. Okay, this is not light. Now granted, if you're buying a Marvel Omnibus, you know you're going to be buying something that's a collection. You know it's going to be something that's heavy. There's a reason why you're buying the Omnibus. You want everything in it. So I think this is one of those cost-benefit things. Yeah, you want it all in one place to read it. Well, you know what? If you want a good quality book, it's going to weigh something. So get yourself a book stand, put it on your desk, and be prepared to sit at your desk and read this. Because sitting with this on your lap when you're in your armchair, not that comfortable at all. Let's get to the inside of this thing and take a look. Well, that's a nice bright splash page. I like that. Now, this is where you really get to see the start of what you're getting on the inside. Take a look at this. It's a beautiful image. And look at the colors. And look at the way the inking is done and how it's touched up. They have really done a good job in presenting this. Now, if you've taken the original books, hold on for a second, okay? Here, let's, here. You know what, you stand there for a minute. Stand. All right, walking over here. Where is my, yeah, okay. All right, here's what we're gonna do. Now, this is obviously giant size Invaders that we're looking at right here. But if I go forward and I get to Invaders #1, the giant size is a big issue. There you go. Take a look at the covers side by side. This is a lot brighter. This is a good condition copy of #1, by the way, just in case you're curious. Not good as in good on the grading scale, but this is a nice condition. It's not minty, but it's the colors are nicely maintained and it's not that badly destroyed. But take a look at the colors here. Look at how bright that is as compared to that. Look at the Submariner's skin tone here versus the blanched out skin tone here. Look at the red in Captain America's shield and boots as compared to the original comic. Now, this comic is not faded. This comic has been well preserved. This is how much they've actually touched these things up. If you can even see it in the blue in the plane. It's a material difference, and you can really see how they've done the job of touching these colors up and really brightening them. Now, I know a lot of people, when they're looking at these omnibus and these trade paperbacks, especially when it's something that people look at the original books as being somewhat sacrosanct, they really do get a little touchy about the touch-ups of what we'll call the colors in the actual work inside the book. They want it left as is. And I can see that. I really can see that. But this is 1975 comics. right? There's nothing here that's really, oh, these are sacrosanct. These are done by Stan Lee, or it's not Stan Lee. Stan Lee didn't do anything, actually. These are done by Jack Kirby. Well, yeah, well, these aren't Jack Kirby. Well, some of the covers are, actually. But really, for the most part, they're not. And this isn't something where you should be getting upset about the touch-ups, because really the touch-ups in this really do add an extra dimension. They add that extra pop off the page. They've done a good job on the touch-up on this one, and I do want to say that now. What do we want to talk about this in this physically, though? Here's something that I want to talk about, though. You hear that sound? You hear me doing this to check the pages? I was doing that the entire time I was reading this, okay? When you're going through a lot of Omnibus, and I have been going through a lot of Omnibus lately, what I find is a lot of them have a wide variety of what page and what page type you're going to get in this. It seems to me the more stories you're trying to ram into one of these, the lower quality the paper's being printed on. Now this one, they were trying to put a lot in here. This paper as we got it right here, this is somewhat lighter stock. When I compare this to my Cull the Savage Omnibus that's sitting over there in the library, my Cull the Conqueror, those were printed on materially thicker stock paper. When you were going through it, it physically felt heavier in your fingers, and it was heavier. It physically felt heavier as you were reading it. And to me, that made the whole reading experience more enjoyable. It felt like you had something more substantial in your hands. Not necessarily sustainable, because that much paper really is not sustainable, but it's definitely something more substantial in your hands. It adds something to the experience. This is lighter. This is lighter, but I gotta tell you, I'm not gonna give them grief on this, because there just was so much they were trying to ram into this thing. Like, look at the overall table of contents at the front. Look at the number of issues they're putting in here. There's almost 1,100 pages in this comic. This is 1,100 pages. That's a lot of material to put in here, so I am not giving them any grief on that whatsoever. They did a good job on this, despite the fact that I think it is what I'll call cheaper paper as we're going through it. Let's get back to the back here. I wanted to actually point out something else here, because really an omnibus is an omnibus, right? The story is going to be the story. Let's talk about some of the inclusions they stuck in the back that I thought were kind of neat. You got some bicentennial stuff in here, which is kind of cool. There's nothing matter with that. You have the inclusion of, where are we here? Some art where they actually walk through the original. So this is kind of interesting. There's Fortress Europa at the front. This was the cover we saw on the front of the dust jacket. See it right there? So they misinterpreted the blocks around this. They thought the blocks, I guess, and if you read the comment down here, were actually supposed to be sort of, you know, crumbling or falling apart. Whereas what they were actually blocks around a turret. Kind of neat. I like that. I like the fact that you could see on some of these where they did the difference between where they said, hey, listen, here's the page with a pencil, and here's the ink at the end of the day. That's kind of cool. Another thing that was in here that was kind of neat, I don't want to spoil all this stuff for you, was they stuck in the excerpts from the Handbook to the Marvel Universe. That's pretty darn cool. I like the fact that they included that in there. And at the very back, you got some art that was used in some of the other trade paperbacks that were put out, which you wouldn't get if you bought this omnibus. That's Agent Access, by the way. Poor guy. Anyways, very neat the way they put this together. I think they did do a good job. It makes a nice physical book. And honestly, if I wanted to say, am I going to be happy to have this on my shelf, or angry or disappointed in it? This is one, unlike some other ones, I actually am happy to have on the shelf. Nicely put together. Physically, this gets the thumbs up. All right, we got through that monstrosity of what this thing physically looks like. So now let's get into the question of what's actually in this thing. Okay, so who are the Invaders? Let's start with that. You've seen the imagery, obviously, as we flip through the pages here, just to give you guys a sense. The Invaders are literally a wartime team created in the 1970s that take action and take place in 1942 and 1943. Effectively, and I alluded to this in part one, Roy Thomas really was looking back on the war years of comics fondly and remembering those as a child and saying, I really want to go back and make something like that. I want to make a comic in which I can see Captain America punching Hitler in the face. This is what I want to do. And he pitched it to Stan. And there was some back and forth when you read through the editorial notes that are within this as to how that whole thing came down. But eventually it did hit. The rubber hit the road and you ended up with a book on the street. And the idea was you were going to take the Marvel Big Three back then and put them in a team. So you ended up with Captain America, the original Human Torch, the android, not Johnny Storm, and you ended up with Submariner. So what's interesting is that of these three, if you back it up and run back to the time when Roy Thomas was actually writing this, 1975, Well, 2 of them were still actively in production at that point in time. The Android one, well, he was touch and go, but we'll talk a little bit more about that later if necessary. If you really want to know more about the Android Human Torch, which I have always found to be an absolutely fascinating subject with the way Marvel has both managed it and mismanaged it, tippity in the notes, because I could do one of those little aside things at the end and we could talk a little bit about that. Anyways, 3 of these guys had to be involved in a team, like the Justice League in World War II. What they did was they fought on the side of the Allies. That was effectively it. You're talking about 1942, 1943. That's the storyline that you're looking at here. They spent most of their time in England in this series because they were there supporting the English in their attempt to hold Fortress Britain against Fortress Europa. So you have all of the Axis occupied areas over here, you have England, and then you have the invaders doing exactly that, invading. They would be taking small missions into the mainland, or they would actually be taking care of issues in the United States or within England themselves. That's effectively what happens in the story. 40 some odd issues of it with a couple overarching stories that go into different titles. You have other teams that are introduced that were based in the United States, but all contemporaneous to 1942 and 1943. So really, that's it. I mean, there's not much else I can tell here as far as what happens because, well, the Second World War is over. It's been over for a long time. We know what happened. And really, you can't sort of rewrite that in the comic. They weren't going for some sort of alternate timeline thing like Earth X on the DC side where the Nazis won. You're literally looking at just falling within our regular timeline here. Interesting stories as they go through this, and there's a lot of little twists in there. The good part about this is, and I'll say this right now, the storylines were written in 1975. There's value in that. I don't know how many of you have read actual comics from the early 1940s. Besides Captain Marvel and the Society of Monsters, I can tell you every story I've read that's been a 1940s story has been utter crap. They're terrible. How comics survived and got to the point of blowing up the way they did, I don't know. There were some good ones, don't get me wrong. You had some classics being put out by AC that actually made you think. And I'm not talking about the shock suspense stories. I'm talking about the stories that were literally the ones that made you think. The sci-fi stories, the social commentary stories, the ones that were humor stories as well. Dark humor, but humor stories. Those obviously made comics carry on. But when you're looking at the actual superhero stories, they were just dumb. It was invariably, oh, you know, this person wore this costume to a costume ball. The Nazi agents were there. They had to foil it. They foiled it while they were in this costume, and they then decided they were going to be a superhero in that costume going forward, and away they go. Like they were just painful. By the time 1975 came around, well, Marvel got a little better at writing. They got a little better at brainstorming. They got a little better at putting pen to paper. So you ended up with stories that were a little more deep. You had character development. You had ongoing story arcs. All of that occurs within this. Some of the story arcs that are within this that I thought were some of the key ones, and there were really ones to watch for, without obviously throwing out any spoilers. I don't want to tell you how anything ends here. There was a love triangle in there. In fact, it was a love triangle that was copied. And I found this fascinating. There was a very material, so we all know the Jean Grey, Wolverine, Cyclops love triangle of X-Men mythos. This is just the thing. I mean, it's meme worthy for crying out loud. And I don't even do the memes and I read the memes, but I know this is meme worthy, which tells me this is obviously permeated enough society that it's a thing. Maybe Marvel was trying to repeat that here. You had this love triangle story going on between Spitfire, Captain America, and the Human Torch. And that was a material piece of story arc in this actual theme of books. And it was fascinating because it didn't just happen once, it happened again, it happened again, it happened again. And then abruptly it stopped. And I found that was fascinating because literally this was a major arc and a major item that was an underlying theme within several stories. And it was enough that they dedicated dialogue to it within the page count. And then full stop. It was still alluded to. And you could hear it in the underlying tones when Spitfire and Captain America were talking later. For example, that episode, the Frankenstein thing with the hat in there. When you read it, you'll know. But it did stop. But Marvel wasn't stupid about this. They said, no, that worked really well then. It works really well in the X-Men. We're going to take this whole thing and transplant it forward. So when the Kid Commandos were created, they did the exact same thing, dumbed down a generation. Toro, Bucky, and I think her name was Golden Girl. The three of them now formed a love triangle, and that had page count and actual dialogue dedicated to it. Very interesting story within that added this underlying theme, an underlying complexity to what is really a simple thing. 3 guys get together with their sidekicks, they meet up with a couple other people, and they go and they punch Nazis. That's effectively the whole point to this comic story. That was a really neat theme that went in here. Another one that was a really neat theme was Marvel building the mythos of the Farnsworths. Now, the Farnsworths for most people mean absolutely nothing. If you've read a lot of Avengers comics, you'll have caught on to something in there. If you've read Captain America comics, well, I guarantee that you've caught on to this. That Farnsworth name has come up a couple times. And even the Thunderbolts, Thunderbolts, that's who it was, which came up much later. There's a reason why you want to know the Farnsworths. They're there. This is a fairly influential family. And a lot of things come out of this. The Destroyer comes out of it. Union Jack comes out of it. Spitfire comes out of it. Baron Blood comes out of it. Baron Blood and his relationship to Dracula comes out of it. These are really large Marvel concepts that are kind of swept under the rug with that editorial asterisk of Death Note that I mentioned earlier, where it's just like, oh, see Invaders #8. No, there's actually a lot more to this. And that theme is sitting underneath and carries the whole way through. In fact, there's another Farnsworth I didn't even mention here, and trust me, he's pretty darned important. All these weird little themes are within here that actually, let's just call them pepper or seasoning, that actually make this very basic story a fairly major story. Additionally, and I will say this, and this is an interesting thing, Roy Thomas was actually trying to humanize what we would picture as these just villainous monsters of 1940s era. Agent Axis, there was something wrong with that guy. I don't know what. And unfortunately, there was obviously a shift in the writing because that arc got dropped. But there's a major issue with that guy. That guy is not doing good. And the writers clearly wanted you to know that. That was a big one. Then you've got that, what is that, the Master Man or whatever he is, and the Warrior Woman. I could say a lot of things about this, and I won't. What I'm going to say is this. What should have been a very one-dimensional, here's a page, here's a picture, this is just it, and we're just going to move on, because all we need is just prototypical bad person to be here, and then we're able to just develop the story. Didn't happen. It was, okay, here's the prototypical image of this happening, and here's the depth behind it. Oh, and here's another layer of depth behind that. Oh, and here's another layer of depth behind that. Oh, and why are they doing that? Oh, there's another layer of depth behind that. Yeah, the 1970s writing on this really took 1940s themes and made them something a heck of a lot better. And really, if you were going to go out there and say to yourself, if I'm going to buy myself an omnibus that's got a whole bunch of war era Atlas books and read those, and this is going to be the best reading ever, or you had the choice of buying this, I'm going to read this 1970s series of war era stories, I think it's pretty clear which side I'm going to be leaning on that one. The writing was quite good. Imagery, also quite good. The art in this thing, actually, I think they did a good job, and they made a very big point in the editorial intro to this one as to why they chose the art team they did. I actually see that. In fact, there's only one point in time in this where they had a switch writer jump in a couple times, and I'm not going to name names, but I can tell you, that person should never, ever, ever write superhero comics. Ever. They're very good at what they do, but it is not superheroes. And in fact, I have other collections of their work over here that I absolutely love. So the fact that they were put into this position, which obviously wasn't their comfort zone, and it didn't go well, I feel bad for them. Anyways, those are the overarching themes, and that's what the actual writing is about. Now, the minefields on this one. Let's talk about this for a minute, and we'll do this very, very, very briefly, because I am not going to go down this road. The bottom line is, during the Second World War, bad things happened. Really bad things. 1970s writing was making every effort possible to turn around and say, what we did then was wrong. Which is actually kind of refreshing. It's kind of neat to know that in 1975, we as a society had recognized, wow, what we did there, that was not the right choice. We probably should have done that a little differently or managed it differently, and we definitely should have addressed how we actually looked at it differently. Very neat that they did that. Unfortunately, it did happen. This is a book that's written contemporaneous with 1942 and 1943. The stuff that's happening in here is 1942 and 1943 society. We know 1942 and 1943 society had some issues. So if you're picking this one up, and this is my warning right now, you got to be aware of that and you got to be comfortable with it, because honestly, if you're not, there's going to be a couple books in here where you're going to be going through and you're going to be going, whoa, and it's going to catch you totally off guard. Marvel even took the time to put the editorial asterisk at the front of this thing saying, listen guys, what happened then happened then. We are not supporting it. We're just reproducing it here for historical accuracy. So be aware of that. Word to the wise. Make sure you know. If you're putting this in front of really young kids, make sure you're at least giving them a warning ahead of time in a conceptual conversation of, hey, listen, this is what happened then, but that doesn't make it okay now. Anyways, there's the minefield. We're done with that section. I'm not going to talk about it anymore. Interesting. I actually like the writing in here. I think they did a great job overall. Obviously in 42 issues plus a couple add-ons of other issues, there's obviously going to be some times where it's not quite the hit out of the park point. That was the reference I made earlier where that person probably shouldn't be writing superhero stories. But overall, I think this was well done. Let's get to the last part now, which I actually asked the question, do you need to get this? That's going to be interesting. Okay, here's the one-off, and this is the part where we say, do you need to buy this? Now, this is the part that's completely ad hoc for me, which is kind of neat. I always make the notes when I go through these, and I've got the little notebook sitting right over there, where I say, well, this is what happened in the story. These are some of the things that I noticed that were kind of neat. Here's the high-level points that we want to cover, but I never actually make any notes about the conclusion time, because I always want to make sure this part's organic. Okay, so let's get into this. Should you buy this? Well, here's the thing. You already saw, if you watched, that first part where I said what brought me to this book. What brought me to this book was a need to fill a hole in Marvel's history. I know you can always go on the interwebs and you can sit there on the Google and the Wikipedia and you can tickety in. Well, hold on, what happened in Invaders number 8? I keep referencing Invaders number 8, by the way, because it is actually a key issue. What happened in Invaders number 8? Well, you can find out and you'll get a nice summary there. But summaries miss details. Summaries miss the mood. They miss the theme. When the editor is putting in the note saying asterisk, see Invaders number 8, their assumption is that you've read it or you will read it. Because one of the things that happens in comics is, as we know, it's pictures and words. But with pictures and words comes an attempt to deliver a mood, a theme, an overall feeling. And when you're reading a Wikipedia article, I actually don't believe you're getting that. And it's unfortunate. I mean, I wish when people are putting together more of the details that are sitting in the Marvel fandom, for example, that site, that they could give you more of the feeling that comes with it, but they can't, because obviously there's limitations of what they're presenting to you. And it's sitting there and actually reproducing the comic online. Well, at that point in time, you might as well just go buy a digital copy of it and then just go from there. But I don't read digital, so I need a hard copy. So for me, I said I need this because, and I had that rationale. So emotionally, intellectually, however you want to classify that, for me, this was something of a need. It was an actual, I need to get this. When I couldn't get the actual individual issues for reasonable prices, note the raised eyebrow, I wasn't too pleased with that, this omnibus was the solution. And I'm glad I ended up with this, and I'm glad I read through it. Is it physically a nice book? Yes, so we got to that part. I think this was well made. I really do enjoy the way this book feels. I like everything they did with it. There's an issue with weight. There's an issue with readability, but honestly, what can you do? You've got over 40 some odd issues here. You've made an omnibus. When somebody buys an omnibus, they know it's going to be a big, heavy book. So I don't think Marvel did anything wrong there. Story-wise, should you read this? Is there anything in this that you probably should get just for story? Well, that whole love triangle thing, where the heck was that? Hey, here's a bombshell for you. Did you know Toro's a mutant? Probably didn't. I bet you didn't. And I gotta tell you, I sure as hell didn't. And the fact that they threw that in there, 1975. That's right, 1975, they were labeling Toro in 1942 as a mutant. And the original Human Torch knew it. And Captain America knew what a mutant was. And the Submariner knew. They all had a conversation at that point in time, knew exactly what a mutant was and went, oh yeah, he's a mutant. Okay, well, that makes sense. You're gonna have to do some serious digging on the interwebs to find that kind of detail. So really, do you need to have this? Well, here's my takeaway on this. If you are a Marvel reader, if you're a completist, if you're somebody who likes to know what's going on in, let's call it the superhero arc, the superhero storyline, then yes, I would say you do need to read this. Because if you're reading the old Captain Americas, if you're reading the old Fantastic Fours, if you're reading the old Avengers, these characters and these themes come up time and time again. And you're going to see that editorial asterisk of death pop up time and time again. So you're going to have to get this bad boy. Do you need it, or can you do a Wikipedia search? Well, there are times where, quite frankly put, if you just say, well, what happened in Invaders number 8? All I need to know is what happened. First Prince of Union Jack. Done. I'm good with that. All you need to know, then go ahead. You don't need to buy this. If you're somebody that wants the themes, wants the details, and wants the feelings with what went that original story, well, you're going to want to pick this up. All right, let's wrap this bad boy up. I got to tell you, this was a fun one. And there has been a while here where we have not been producing the videos because the last month has just been nuts. Abso-friggin-lutely nuts. But what it left me with was a lot of time to read. So I actually did finish reading this thing. And really recording this one was one where I was kind of, I was apprehensive, but at the same time, I knew I wanted to get this thing out to you guys. Reason for my apprehension, obviously, because of those minefields, which we've danced around here, I think, rather well. But you never know. Somebody's obviously going to get offended at some point in time with anything I say. So you never know what to go with on these. So I did the best I could. Bottom line here is, I actually do think most people should pick this up. But I do think there should be caveats if you're putting this in front of young kids. Like, hey, listen, kids, here's what happened back in 42. You got to be aware. Interesting book and a nice piece of Marvel completion. I did like that, and it gave me that nice little feeling of understanding of what happened in the past. Really neat. We got some other omnibus that we're going to be reviewing going forward. We got, what do we got? We got the Valiant Eternal Warrior one, which is the first Alien book production of that actual classic omnibus thing that we got to go through. When I'm done that, the next omnibus we're going to be reviewing is probably going to be the full Man-Thing one that I've got over there. And then we're going to be going completely off script. We're not even going to be doing any sort of Marvel stuff. Well, it is Marvel, I guess. And we're going to be doing something that's totally unrelated. It's omnibus sitting right over there, still in the shrink wrap. I'm looking forward to reading it, but it's definitely pushing me outside my comfort zone. Anyways, everybody, let's wrap this bad boy up. I hope you enjoyed this one. We'll see you in the next video. All right, it is Easter egg time. We got the floppity bit at the end of the video, and it's time for us to have a chat. I like doing these ones because, quite frankly, these are just me talking. And there's no theme to it. There's no nothing to it. I don't have to say to myself, okay, Tennessee fans, you need to get the following 5 things covered. We're just chatting. So as I mentioned in the closing on this video, this last month for me has been absolutely nuts. I got to tell you, there was some health issues in there. There was some business issues in there. There was just issues in there. If you want issues, there was issues. But thankfully, we're all through it now. And quite frankly, I'm so happy that's over. But what happened was it left me with pretty much a month where I had really nothing that I could do. Couldn't go out and do stuff. I was too busy working to actually do anything that'd be kind of fun. So at the end of the day, really all I had was, okay, work, deal with the issues, and then at the same time do some reading. So we're going to do this one with a close off with, well, Tennessee Fats, what are you reading today? Well, actually, it's not what I'm reading today. It's what I finished. And this one really surprised me. And here's a hint. Remember when I mentioned at the close of this video that really we're going to be doing something much further down the road, so way outside the comfort zone? It's kind of related to this. Here's what happened. I was out and I says to myself, you should probably try to expand what you're reading a little bit. And just a little. Not a lot, a little. Because I said to myself, you really are becoming a one-trick pony because you're starting to recognize the same themes, the same formulas a lot in what you're reading right now. Because, well, when you're reading in one genre, there's only so many original ideas, right? And I'm not going to go any further than that. So I'm over in the chapters, and I'm wandering around, and I finally find myself in a section where I said, well, this is definitely outside my comfort zone. I don't know anything in here. What am I going to read? This is going to be weird. Well, I did find something, and it was this. Let me just show this to you. That's right. It's a Star Wars book. Yeah. Don't get me wrong. I do love my Star Wars. I'm a big fan of the Star Wars trilogy, the original trilogy. Prequels, the ones afterwards, I actually didn't think were that bad. I know the populace just panned the living crap out of them, but I think possibly people were being a bit too hard on those. But anyways, I do enjoy my Star Wars. I like the whole mythos and I like it, but I like it in a way where I just watch it and it's done. It's like a Bic lighter. You use it until you're done, you throw it away. Or a Lada, for example, a wonderful car that you just spend $10,000 on, and it's the Bic lighter of cars. And when you're done with it, you just throw it away. Anybody who owns a Lada, I apologize. I may have just offended you. Anyways, that's what I think of when I think of Star Wars. But I went out and actually bought a book of the Star Wars. Now, this is not something I would normally ever read, like ever. And I don't know how many times I can say ever, because honestly, it's an ever thing. And the only reason I got this was because I was on that Disney thing and I watched that Ashoka show. And I don't know how many of you watched the Ashoka show, but this Thrawn guy, it's that Thrawn guy, makes an appearance that clearly shows you how much I've identified with the character when I don't know there's an R in their name. Anyways, he's in there. That's all I'm going to say. I don't want to spoil it for anybody who hasn't seen that. Now, I know he's also in, it was a cartoon, Star Wars Rebels. I know he was in there too. And I know that because of the Ashoka show. I don't know that because I've watched Rebels. I haven't watched Rebels. I watched some of Rebels, but I haven't watched Rebels. So anyways, so I'm out and I see this after watching the Ashoka, and I was like, that Thrawn guy seemed to be like he was some sort of highfalutin, big, important thing. I'm going to read this. This will give me a nice break. And quite frankly, but it'll totally take my mind off of everything going on. And it did. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about what happened in this thing here. So here's where I'm at with Star Wars books. I don't think I'm made for Star Wars books. I really don't. Don't get me wrong. I said this was a wonderful book, and it was very well written. Timothy Zahn. I'm going to say this is Zahn, Z-A-H-N. And I got to tell you, this was well written. But here's the issue. This is a story of the origin of Thrawn, which Thrawn, by the way, is not actually his full name. But anyways, it's a story of him. And it's kind of interesting because it's basically the tale of him moving his way up through the ranks in the Empire. Now, we all know what the Empire is, right? Like, we know the Empire. The Empire is the Empire, right? But this very much is like reading an administrative history of like an executive moving up in GM. That's really what you sense you get. It's a lot of politics. It's a lot of administration. It's a lot of politics. And it really leaves you with, well, yeah, that was neat. And there are some great themes in here, and there are some great underlying tones, and it definitely makes you rethink a lot of things. But it's just not for me. It really isn't. It's just not my bailiwick. But I think this was really well done. It gives you a very good history of this Thrawn guy, whoever he is. And it really gives you a sense of what he's going for. Now, here's where I'm at on this one. I don't know if you need to read this or not. Maybe you just want, maybe this information is in fact on the Google and you just want to go and look in the Google for this. But I got to tell you, he was right. Absolutely fascinating. Like, don't get me wrong, I have always identified myself more as a Sith Lord than a Jedi. That's just me. But I got to tell you, I find it fascinating that I now really do identify, yeah, he's kind of right. Number one. And number two, even though I watch all those Star Wars movies and TV shows that I have watched, I've always, even though I might identify myself as a Sith guy, I have always identified myself definitely as being more of a rebel. I'm not sure I do that anymore. I'm kind of leaning towards Team Empire in this one. I think Empire actually does have the right idea. Maybe not in its actions, but maybe in its goals. Now, there is something that is referenced in the back of this. And I don't mean in the back, this is still on the back page. I mean, as in, there's another entity referenced in here, which is referenced a couple times, but really they lead into the cliffhanger at the end of this one where you're like, oh. And I gotta tell you, I'm not spoiling it. Not spoiling it. But, Timothy's on. If you're out there, okay, you've got me interested. You do. You write me a book on that, and even though this isn't my shtick, I will read it. There you go. So all of our viewers out there, if you're wondering what I read, I just read that. It was good. And honestly, if you were thinking about reading a Star Wars book, I could tell you this might be a good one for you. Because really, it's the only Star Wars book I've ever read, and I kind of liked it. Yeah, neat. Well, everybody, that's where we're wrapping this one up. See you in the next one.